All right, we are going to go ahead and get started. Do you want me to ask everyone to move down? What? Do you want me to ask people to move down? All right, we have a few people that just were too tempted by the sunshine in the Friday afternoon, I think. So for the rest of you, if you feel like it, we invite you to move lower and closer to be part of our inclusive learning environment. Okay, that went over well.
Yeah, I can see nobody's moving.
All right, so let me introduce Dr. Rita Lee. So Rita is a general internist here at the university and an LIC preceptor. She also is the director of our health and society thread and a true expert in diversity, bias training, and is here to talk to us about inclusive learning environments. Welcome.
Thank you all.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me. So one thing you will notice is I actually took my degree off of my title slide. What we're trying to do across the campus is to try to flatten the hierarchy. What? Am I using a lapel? Is that not? All right, I'm doing this. Okay. Am I loud enough? Okay. And the other thing is that I have my pronouns on my slide. So I go by the name of Rita. I use she, her pronouns. And so what we're going to be talking about today is how to create an inclusive learning environment. And my understanding from this group is that some of you are LIC preceptors who will be working with the students one-on-one, and others of you will be potentially teaching in small groups. Is that correct? Maybe we'll find out. Okay, so what I'm hoping to do today is just really kind of get to a conversation around defining inclusivity and then talking about strategies to create an inclusive learning environment. So what I'd like to do is just start with a check-in, and I'm not sure how we start with the Zoomies. Do you have the Zoomies on? Okay, so do we have them unmute one at a time to go,
or they can put things, Zoomers can put things into the chat, or if they turn on their camera, they will appear in a kind of large frame on our screen. Which I've learned my lesson about.
And they're like,
oh, frozen up there. What do you want to ask them? Oh, there's one.
So, yep. So the check-in, if you can see who's there, just so we know what order to go in, the name, your roles kind of on this campus, and then if you were a flavor of ice cream, what would it be and why?
Here they're coming.
Okay.
I'm going to be real large now. Okay, I'm just going to start calling out people. Sipa.
I'm going to regret you making me be on video. I don't know how large I am up down there.
You're not too big. It's okay.
Oh, okay. So my name is Sipa Patel. I am a primary care in Colorado Springs, employed by Centura, and been doing LIC, I guess, for a year, 2 years or something. Flavor of ice cream. I'm going with my favorite, which is something that I'm not allowed to have regularly, would be like a brownie chocolate ice cream. I like that ice cream because there's a little bit of cake in there and then there's a little bit of ice cream in there. So I like to have the best of both worlds right there.
All right. I'm going to maybe alternate between people who are putting things. I'm going to have an impossible time keeping track of this. So we've got Lainey, who's a peds hospitalist in Colorado Springs, who says her favorite is mint chocolate. Mitra, since you are on Zoom, you're going to have to call it out yourself.
Yeah, and don't forget to tell us why you would be that ice cream flavor.
Oh.
Oh, I can't hear Mitra. Mitra, we can't hear you.
Oh, no. No?
Yep.
Yeah. Mitra Razagi. I'm a physician at Anschutz Medical Campus at Wish Clinic. I like the chocolate chip mint flavor of the ice cream. It has a base of vanilla plus mint, plus the color of green, and the benefit of chocolate. So a little bit of everything.
All right, Bella, it looks like you're on camera. You're up next.
Hi, I'm Bella. I'm a family medicine provider at Clinica Family Health, and we're going to have our first LIC student this upcoming fall. I would be coffee ice cream because it's energizing and I always want more energy. Might not need it, but also it's delicious.
Barb.
So my name is Barb. Can you hear me? My name is Barb Burrows, and I'm
Yep.
a PA with Denver Health, and I work at a school-based health center. I've been there 15 years, and so they're going to have some of the Denver Health pediatric LIC students come through my clinic. So I'm not doing every lecture. I'm just doing some of the ones they said to do. And my favorite, I would be cinnamon honey cayenne. We have some friends in Crested Butte that make that flavor, and it's a little bit spicy, and then the honey makes it a little bit sweet, and it's unique.
Never tried that. Megan.
Hello, my name is Megan Likey. I am in Grand Junction, Colorado, and I am going to help with the Rural Track LIC over here on the Western Slope. It's nice to meet all of you. I have never thought about myself as a flavor of ice cream, so I have no idea what I would say to that.
All right. A bunch of people have put their favorite ice creams and why in the chat. Would any of you like to actually turn on your camera so we can meet you and tell us about it, or shall I read? Yay, Lisa.
Hi, I'm Lisa. I'm a PCP at the VA, and I said I would be Ben and Jerry's Cherry Garcia because I love cherries, and I also like Jerry Garcia, who it's named after.
That's perfect. Megan.
Hi, I'm Megan Treats. I'm a general pediatrician and I'm the LIC director for the Children's LIC. And I keep saying that I'm half of a PEDS liaison because Jenny Soap and I share that role. And I would be cinnamon ice cream, which has always been my favorite. And I put in the chat that my why is because it's a little different.
Anyone else want to come on, or I'll start reading. All right, so Greg Sturgeon is an IM hospitalist at St. Joe's. Cookie dough, cashew, ice cream with a smiley face. I'm going to assume that means it makes him happy. Mandy Swanson is not talking because she's near her sleeping toddler. She's a rural preceptor and LIC assistant coordinator and would say cookie dough because I'm awesome, but parts of me are not quite done yet. Oh, I love that. Molly Brett says PCP at the VA, vanilla with sprinkles because it is fun in all caps. Emily Warm is a pediatrician at Kaiser and a new LIC preceptor, vanilla because it goes with everything and I get along with everyone. Love that. Anna Lawrence is one of the pediatric hospitalists in Colorado Springs. If I were a type of ice cream, it would be cookie dough, yummy vanilla with delicious bites of cookie dough. Just a good combo of good things. Shelby, forgive me if I'm mispronouncing names, y'all. Shelly Lemke, Peds hospitalist in Colorado Springs, chocolate ice cream, simple, unfussy, but amazing because of that. Anna Ruman, Peds hospitalist at Children's, Denver, coconut, reminds me of the beach. Makame, please forgive me if I'm mispronouncing that. Tracy, family medicine at Kaiser, likes pistachio ice cream. Carly Field is in OBGYN at Clinica Family Health, would be salted caramel from Licks in Denver. I love Licks too, because it's the best ice cream and it is uber nostalgic for me, has both some salty and sweet. Mindy Lamb is an internal medicine PCP at Anschutz. maroon glacé gelato roasted sugar chestnuts. So amazing and unique and reminds me of Italy.
So there's Zoomies.
That's it's not everybody, but it's everyone who chooses to share their a lot on Zoom. Oh, here's one more. Ravi Gopal, PCP at the VA, Neapolitan ice cream because I like variety.
Okay, great. I forgot to do mine. Rita Lee, she, her pronouns, Director of Health System Science, AKA Health and Society. If I were a flavor of ice cream, I would be Rocky Road because I'm a little bit nutty, I'm a little bit squishy, and a little bit lumpy because I'm not like, I'm not smooth or churned right. I'm a little wonky. All right, why don't we start here in the back, if you wouldn't mind going? I'm pointing at you. Yeah. Thanks. Are we passing the mic?
Brandy, Clinical Content Director for Family Medicine. I'm stealing the cookie dough because it's great the way it is, but I am developing and growing and maturing still.
Well done. I'm Brian Wan. I'm the clinical liaison for family medicine over at Kaiser Permanente, he, him. I'm going to go with ube coconut swirl, a delicious purple flavor of the Philippines. If anyone hasn't had it, it's the AAPI special over at Baskin Robbins, and it's the only one I relate to.
I'm Frances, and I'm a family doc at Kaiser. I like peanut butter party. It's a blue bunny flavor. This was a flavor from Iowa. I grew up like half hour from where this place makes ice cream. But peanut butter, high fat, high protein, kind of describes my body. And party because I liked every time.
Hey team, I'm Austin Butterfield. I'm one of the psychiatrists at Children's and clinical content director for psychiatry. Clearly I'm butter pecan because butters has been my nickname since I was like 6. And I am a nut, and my work obviously will be around some of nuts as well.
I'm Ashley Curry. I'm the psychiatry liaison at Denver Health. If I were an ice cream, I'd be grape nut because I'm sure you all haven't heard of it, but it's a central Pennsylvania delicacy. And I think it helps us feel like we're eating healthy.
Hi, I'm Sonia. I'm a physician assistant in Longmont with Salud. I think if I was an ice cream, I'd be pistachio. I like the green and creamy, salty, sweet, nutty. Kind of that. It describes my personality. So there you go.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kristen, Norton Health. I'm one of the faculty in emergency medicine. I've been doing this for like 100 years. And there's absolutely no way I can choose a single ice cream. No way. Every single one of them, all the time. That's just kind of the way I am.
What? You spell like the ER?
Yeah.
Yeah, whatever you throw at me, I'll take it.
I'm Lauren Rhodes. I'm the family medicine liaison at Denver Health. I think I would be peanut butter chocolate because I am delicious and salty and savory, but also like you can probably have too much of me pretty quickly. So.
Charity Lane, family doctor at Denver Health. I'm really struggling with this question, but I just chose the strawberry rhubarb at Sweet Action on South Broadway just because it's delicious and you should try it. And I don't know how it relates to my personality.
Hi, Roberto Silva. I'm LIC director of the rural LIC and LIC preceptor at Denver Health, and I'm going to steal someone else's Neapolitan because of the variety.
Hi, I'm Ash. I'm one of the new sinus and skull-based surgeons in the ENT department here. I just started about 6 weeks ago. If I were flavor of ice cream, I'm going to go with the go on the same thought process as the chocolate chip cookie dough, but I'll go with half baked because it's delicious and I love it.
Hi, I'm Sherry Arnold-Waring. I'm a pediatrician and I'm the director of medical education at the Colorado Permanente Medical Group and the director of the KPLIC. And I'm going to go with Kauai Pie because it reminds me of my honeymoon, which was probably 26 years ago, but great ice cream.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ellen Astor, and I'm the education specialist at the Fort Collins branch. And if I were an ice cream, I'd be Chunky Monkey because I am fun as the education specialist, and I have a lot going on, but somehow it all comes together.
Mark Deutschman, family medicine, director of the rural program, pistachio nut because I like it.
My name is Michael. Oh, geez, that is loud. Sorry, we got about that. Michael Schmitz. I'm one of the family medicine docs at Kaiser. I'm really mad at Ash for stealing half baked because that's what I was going to choose. And I like to think that most of my ideas when they start out are always half baked, but usually will always come together at the end.
Hi, my name is Kavita. I'm an internal medicine doc at Denver Health, and I've been an LIC preceptor for about a year. I would choose birthday cake ice cream because it makes me feel like every day is a party.
Hi, Luke Casillas, family medicine. I'm CMO for Access Health Systems down in southwestern Colorado. We are just getting ready to start with LIC, so very excited. If I were an ice cream, probably French vanilla, just because you can usually find it almost any place that you've been, even in rural areas, and it is smooth and sweet.
Hi, I'm Erin Mckay. I'm a LIC coordinator down in Colorado Springs. I don't know. I don't know what my favorite ice cream to eat is mocha almond fudge. So it's like a variety of textures and flavors, and it's a little bit salty and sweet. And so I think that's why I like being a coordinator so much, is because I get to do a variety of different things and it's never just the same all the time.
Hi, I'm Dan Wynn. I'm a psych liaison with Kaiser. If I was a flavor of ice cream, I guess I'd be dulce de leche, caramel and vanilla that go great together.
What? Well, maybe we can go get ice cream afterwards. Maybe we can go to Licks.
My name is Phil Hitchcock. I'm an internist at CU Cherry Creek. I also LIC preceptor and I precept first years, and I'm also a docs coach. I hate to disappoint, but I actually don't like ice cream, so I cannot envision myself as one. But I love potato chips, and so if I were to pick a flavor of potato chips, I would be sour cream and onion. I guess maybe because it's three things that you wouldn't think go together, and I have a tendency to hold many different contradicting beliefs at once.
Ice cream's my favorite food. So I don't understand people that don't like ice cream.
This is an inclusive, non-judgmental environment.
Okay, sorry. I'm sure we'll find something else in common. I'm Jennifer Adams. I'm an internal medicine preceptor at Denver Health and the assistant dean of the clinical curriculum here at the school. I just love all ice cream, I think. My favorite is coffee, but it needs to have something chocolatey mixed in because, like brownies or fudge or little toffees or something like that. And that's because coffee and chocolate are my two favorite things. And then Anne Frank also has added to the chat that she likes lemon because she's driving and can't write much.
Not because she's sour.
I'm Erin Mckay. I'm a pediatric hospitalist at the Children's Hospital in Colorado Springs. My husband makes homemade ice cream, so I'm writing down all your good flavor ideas. And I guess I'll say if I were to be an ice cream flavor, I would be chocolate covered cherry because I'm actually kind of like tart and sassy, but I try to cover that with sweetness.
Hey, I'm Jill Remy, family medicine doctor down in Durango, work with Dr. Casillas. I think I have to go with Haagen-Dazs chocolate peanut butter because it's just a really well done classic. But I have to ask the grape nut person, was that at Myers Dairy in State College? Yeah, nice. I'm from there. Yeah. Oh, very nice. Yeah, so like Myers Dairy is this awesome dairy in State College, Pennsylvania, where still cows on the hillside and they make ice cream and you can bring your milk jugs to reuse and it goes, you can watch them put in the milk and all that. It's a great childhood experience and that's the only place I've ever had grape nut ice cream. So I'm like, I wonder. So cool.
Hi, I'm Frank Merritt. I'm a hospitalist at the university and assistant director for the Inquiry LIC there. And I'm going to go with an Earl Grey shortbread ice cream I had recently because it's interesting in an understated sort of way.
Just like you.
I'm Brian Lublin. My pronouns are he, him. I am a hospitalist at the VA and one of the VA LIC directors. And my favorite of ice cream, I'm going to go with vanilla because at my core, I'm kind of bland. But you add the right toppings and then it could be a little more fun.
My name's Eric Young. I'm the VA LIC director. And I'm going to go with coffee ice cream just because I drink so much of it. I feel like it must in some way embody me now. So.
All right.
I've
Great.
got one more in the chat. Okay, Mary McCord, outpatient general internist at Anschutz, amaretto ice cream. It looks like vanilla, but has a kick.
I share an office with Mary. That's pretty accurate. All right. So what we want to do today is just have a conversation. I'm hoping we don't go all the way till 4:30 because I know y'all have been sitting for a while. But what I want to do is just create a, talk about what we want to do as a community agreement for how we want to be able to have this conversation. My hope is to bring up some potentially challenging situations in terms of how we want to create an inclusive environment. And so some of the things that I think we ought to talk about is kind of number one is confidentiality. So generally what we like to do is say like what is said here, like personal stories, if you name a situation or you tell us a story, that stays here and doesn't go outside this room. But what is learned should be shared broadly. Okay. Our hope is that you'll be present with an open mind and an open heart. Okay. And our goal is really to create a learning community here where we can not be judgmental. It's not about blame or shame. It's not about being a good or a bad person. It's just being human, being real. Okay. And trying to lean into this thing called a brave space, right? Where it takes vulnerability to say, hey, I'm not really good at that. Or here's a bias or something that I struggle with. And lean into that discomfort of those conversations. And then really try to engage and listen for understanding from each other. Okay. Any other agreements that we want to come to together that would make this a better place for us to have that conversation? And you'll let me know if the Zoom folks have any input too, right? Okay. Okay. So I just want to provide you all just a little bit of context related to health system science and health and society for what our students or your students are going to be coming to you with. Just so I think that might be helpful for some of the topics that they may potentially bring up with you, because we've been having a lot of conversations around structural racism and equity. So just in general, health system science, you're going to see, you don't have to memorize these, but we cover a lot of different topics, including population and public health, evidence-based medicine, policy, economics and finance, leadership skills, healthcare structures and processes, informatics, value-based care, health systems improvement, AKA like QI, patient safety, as well as ethics. Okay, so when you see what I'm about to show you, there's a lot of color coding because we love color because it makes our work less tedious. So some of the things that we are covering are challenging topics, and our students hopefully have been thinking about this all year. And that is going to be things like we talked about structural racism. I know Dr. Zimmer Shante gave you a talk about biases, microaggressions, and cultural humility. We talk about disability, talk about access to care. They have some basic EBM content, conflict, tobacco use, intersectionality, minority stress theory, like how do our different identities kind of collide and impact our overall health, okay, as well as nutrition. I'm not going to go through every single one of these, but just to give you an idea of where our students are thinking, right? We also talk about culture, religion, spirituality, how that impacts our experience of healthcare, as well as the healthcare we want to receive, how to work with individuals who may have limited English proficiency. We talk a lot about collaborative leadership, shared decision-making, and really working kind of with our patients and with our communities. Okay. We also talk about things like health literacy and the language, and you'll hear a lot of this when we go into what we're going to be talking about this afternoon is like when we use terms like health literacy, the implication is that our patients are not health literate, right? Which puts the onus potentially in a derogatory perspective on the patient and the community, right? As opposed to the onus on us to provide effective health communication, right? They didn't go through 4 years of medical school and 10 years of whatever residency and training and practice, et cetera, et cetera. It is our job to communicate with our patients, not their job to necessarily understand all of our lingo, right? And I will personally, as a primary care general internist, I do not know how to read the ophthalmology notes because it's that only, right? It's that same thing of like, it's all the O's and the L's and all the letters. And I'm like, I have no idea what you just said, right? It's that kind of thing. Okay, we also do talk about disability or individuals who are living with a disability, individuals who have mobility challenges, intimate partner violence, child abuse, adverse childhood events, substance use disorder. We talk a lot about stigma related to all of those topics, okay? Including stigma related to obesity, right? How do we care for individuals who are immigrants to the United States? Okay, LGBT health, controversies we'll be covering. So they're kind of primed to be looking for a lot of this, including like structural racism in healthcare. And so they may be coming to you with questions about these topics. And we want to make sure that you're prepared to be able to have conversations around this, in addition to just kind of proactively creating an inclusive learning environment. Any questions about that? I know I flew through it. I don't want to bore you with the stuff I do every day. But, okay. So in that context, really what we want to think about is what do we need to do to create an inclusive environment? But first, we have to see, what is inclusivity? What do you all think? Let me know if anything shows up in the chat. What does inclusivity mean to you? Access to the conversation? Bringing everybody into the fold. Belonging. Open-minded. Anything in the chat? No? Okay. All right. So these are all great ideas, right? And essentially, that's what it is. It's really to be intentional about incorporating strategies and practices that foster a sense of belonging, okay, by promoting meaningful interactions among individuals and or groups that represents different traits, perceptions, and experiences, right? My lived experience is very different than your lived experience. And what I need to feel a sense of belonging, right, might be different than what you might need. But what we're trying to do is create an environment where everybody feels like, whether they like ice cream or not, if you're a chip person, you still belong in a group of people who love ice cream, right? And there's no judgment there. I love chips too, right? So I just want to quickly, just so I make sure I can tailor this conversation a little bit better, like what are your concerns around creating an inclusive environment, if you have any? Unconscious bias? Okay. Anything else? Bias coming from patients? Okay. Okay. Yeah.
I actually think the students are ahead of the faculty on this stuff. Thanks to your incredible curriculum demonstrated, I feel like the faculty are the ones that need the modern era. And I need some help with looking at that in my environment.
Okay. So the comment was the students might actually be ahead of us as faculty, and they often think that they are. It might be true, may not be. That's the perception often. And we want to get update. Yeah. Okay, people not being aware that they're not inclusive. Okay, like you as a faculty member or? Okay.
I don't know if that's just when you realize how this conversation is offensive. You know, so it's creating awareness amongst.
Okay, so creating awareness amongst people that are working with the students. Good, that's helpful. Because that's sort of how I framed it a little bit. So what I might do is I had some on kind of small group teaching strategies. Sounds like, should I gloss over that and focus more at the individual level, or just want to make sure I'm responsive to the group? If you're going to spend Friday afternoon here, we might as well make it useful. Okay, so we know that students from underrepresented groups, okay, into literature, you'll see URAM, this is UMG in this particular terminology. We know that they experience discrimination on a regular basis. The cumulative effect is the sense of lack of belongingness, lack of inclusion, and it's associated with adverse outcomes because your cognitive load is based on, am I going to make it through today? Right? I'm worried about all the microaggressions I might be experiencing, or I'm worried about whether I feel welcome and less worried about what my performance is going to look like. Okay? And all aspects of our learning community can act as facilitators or barriers to doing that. Okay, so what we want to do is we're trying to create a supportive peer culture. If you're ever working with the students or your clinical team in groups, really what we're trying to do is to foster an environment where we know each other, right? And that's what the check-in that we did at the beginning is, a little bit of something, right? We know each other now, we know what our backgrounds are a little bit, but we're starting to get literally a flavor, because we talked about ice cream or chip flavors, right, of who you are and what you like as on a human level. Okay, and when we are seeing each other as humans first, that creates a sense of that culture and inclusive environment. Okay, set positive expectations for how you will interact. Okay, the community agreement, we try to stay away from things like ground rules are okay. Norms, because norm has a potential for creating kind of like a dominant culture type of situation where people have been traditionally kind of ostracized because they don't follow, quote unquote, the norms. We try to avoid that terminology and say this is a community agreement for how we want to work with each other. Okay. And then statements around professional behavior and civility. This is just an example of like a brave space type of conversation that you might want to do. Okay. I did a very brief brave space conversation about how we want to interact with each other. Okay. And what we want to do is recognize how students are feeling included, right? Language is so important here. Like we're talking about, like most of those microaggressions that you talked about yesterday are language that we use on a regular basis. We're acculturated to it because it's common lingo. We see it in TV, and those are the habits that we're really trying to break. and really try to use neutral language, right? So I usually recommend starting with your name and pronouns, okay? And, you know, instead of saying like you guys, you could say you all or all of you or hi everyone to make it inclusive of people with different identities and different genders. Instead of using things like, you know, what does your husband or wife do? You can use something more gender neutral, like what is your partner, spouse, or significant other? Okay. For holiday break, use holiday break or winter break instead of Christmas, right? Because not all of our students actually are of a Christian faith or practice celebrating Christmas. Okay. Words like move instead of walk. Okay. More inclusive for individuals who might use mobility devices, okay, who may not be actually truly walking, but they need to move from one place to another, okay? And the other thing is when you think about if you're gonna have conversations or check-ins, you want check-ins that are more inclusive of people who might have different lived experiences or like socioeconomic status, right? Like, we try not to say things like, tell us about your favorite vacation. And let me start with some grand worldwide tour that was really expensive sounding that I did, right? Because individuals who may come from socioeconomically disadvantaged backgrounds may not feel like that includes them, okay? So you can say things like, if you had all of the money in the world, what would your vacation be and why? Okay, or something more generic like favorite food or something like that. Okay, if you want to talk about something, you can say something like, for those of you who have traveled abroad, right? Instead of remember the last time, because maybe there was never a last time. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. The other thing we want to do is if we're ever in groups is look at the opportunities for participation. There's a lot of data that minoritized individuals have a tendency to be called on less, or if they do speak up, sometimes they're not heard, right? There's also, when we think about in group meetings, the joke is, there's a joke about like, there's a typical gender bias around who gets heard, right? Like if I say something, I might get ignored, but if, you know, there's a male sitting next to me who repeats the exact same thing, suddenly that's a phenomenal idea. Okay, that type of thing. We just want to make sure we're attuned to that and paying attention. Who also are we calling on if we're in a group setting? Okay. And then trying to foster dialogue. So if there is a difficult conversation, trying not to take sides, right? And really focusing on the process of having the conversation, using, right, like I statements and talking about the topic or the issue at hand rather than, you know, you are a bad person because you hold this belief that is different than mine. Okay. And then finally, it's like modeling vulnerability, learning, and openness. I talk about my mistakes all the time. Okay. Number one, I make a lot of them. They happen all the time. And number two, what we're really trying to model is that growth mindset so it's inclusive. So people don't feel like they have to hide who they are or hide what their beliefs are for fear of retribution. Okay. When we're working, you know, I think the first time you're meeting your student, I think it's helpful to ask, what is it that they think they need for an inclusive environment? So with my LIC student, the first day we met, I was like, okay, well, tell me about yourself. I got a bio from them, for my LIC coordinator. They sent me my student's bio. And I said, well, it's not fair that I have your bio, but you don't have mine. So I sent them a little blurb about me, right? To try to level that playing field. What is it that you need? How do you learn best? Okay. Pre-plan how you may want to address implicit biases, whether they come from your colleagues or patients. Okay. Do you want me to interrupt on your behalf? Or do you want me to give you the opportunity, right, to yield your power to intervene first? Okay. Or do you want to just debrief these and not do anything? Or, right, is there a signal that we want to create so that if something happens, then I step in? Okay. Again, getting to know them as an individual is obviously key. And then I think the other thing is, right, making sure we ask a lot of open-ended questions. We have a tendency, so do you like the Broncos? So do you ski? Right? As opposed to, what do you like to do in your free time? Okay. And then don't expect them to speak for an entire group. I also happen to identify as a lesbian. And so there's a lot of times where I get well, what do the gay people think? And I'm like, I don't know. I know what I think, right? But I can't represent, quote unquote, all the gay people, right? And then the other thing is understand where your feedback is coming from. And what I mean by that is recognizing when you're providing feedback, it's always a bit of a reflection on you as well as a reflection on the student. Okay, and understanding what is truly like knowledge or performance-based feedback versus a style type of a feedback. Okay, I like my presentations this way. That is a style difference versus, right, like if you're doing an HPI, these factors must be there. Okay. And really what we want to do is set them up for success. Okay, this actually comes from the nursing literature, is really kind of getting to where they're feeling, acknowledging those, allowing lots of time for questions and conversation. Okay, how did today go? How did you feel about that patient who, whatever, right? Making sure they feel welcome and appreciated. Thank you for your question, right? You're not annoying me by dragging on my clinic day, right? We're engaging in a dialogue. You're inspiring my curiosity again for medicine, okay? And try to orient them to the clinical environment, both including who the team members are, right? Even things like, I sometimes forget to tell them like where the restrooms are, or where you eat your meals, or where the team room is. Or what the commonly used abbreviations, and if nobody here was an ophthalmologist, but if you could give me the code, that would help me a lot. Okay, and then also help them identify and practice dealing with negative situations. Okay, we get a lot of like, how are we going to process all of these emotions that might be coming on, whether it's anger or sadness or fear, or if it brings something up for them? How do we create that open space of just like, right, without re-traumatizing them per se, but saying like, is this something you want to talk about? Right? Don't feel obligated to, but I'm here to listen and to provide feedback or have a conversation if that's what you want. Okay. All right. I think these are pretty easy, accessible and approachable, really trying to invite participation and feedback. Okay, to model that if I'm giving, like, I expect feedback from you and I'm going to give you feedback. This is a continuous growth process. Like I said, admit to your own mistakes. We're trying to encourage flattened hierarchies. And so again, that's the intentional, call me Rita. You don't have to call me Dr. Lee. It's because we don't say nurse so-and-so and MA so-and-so. We just, and you can make that statement of we're going to go by first names, and that is an intentional choice. Okay. Right. Trying to provide specific actionable behavioral feedback so it feels it's less biased. Okay. Against kind of what the students may perceive as a bias. And then I role model a lot of like, I can't remember. I think it's this, but let's just double check and look it up together. Okay. And then, of course, don't tolerate discriminatory behaviors and address them promptly. I had a patient with my LIC student who made a remark. My student is also of Asian descent, and my patient made a comment about like, well, I'm Italian. I can't stop eating pasta. It's just like me taking rice away from you. I said, well, you can't assume that, right? You can't assume that my student is going to eat rice. Like, you shouldn't make assumptions about my student. Okay. And even just saying something like that really makes them feel included, like you've got their back. Okay. And then other supports, like what are the supports available? Do we call Jen with every problem that arises? No. They all eventually filter up to Jen anyway, right? Sorry. right? But assist with navigating the academic and clinical learning environments, like especially for students who don't have like a strong family background in medicine, or like if they're first generation to college, they may not know you should be doing this or you should be doing that, or how to behave, you know, in our academic environment. And offering them guidance around that can also make them feel really welcome. And making sure to praise students in public. I'm really, you know, a proponent of trying to talk up my student to my patients, right? Oh, you're going to interview with so-and-so, you know, so-and-so, my student is going to see you today. You're so lucky. You know, she's phenomenal. Okay, I can't wait to hear what you talk about. Okay. All right. The other thing is when we speak with our patients about our students is really trying to, again, clarify the student role on the team, making sure we role model effective open-ended questions as well as listening and trying to create that positive impression like we just talked about. Here's where we get into trouble. This isn't directly about our students per se, but there's a lot in the language that we use around patients that make our students feel unwelcome. Okay, because if we are talking about our patients this way, they worry that that is how we are thinking about them as well, especially if they hold any of the identities. Okay, so we're trying to avoid use of adjectives like vulnerable or high risk, dehumanizing language, violent language, as well as unintentional blaming. And I'll go through these in detail. And please feel free to stop me at any time if there's questions. Right, so instead of saying that patient is from a vulnerable group, or they're hard to reach, or they're underserved or disadvantaged, right? It's a deficit model, right? Where we think our patients or our students are lacking, okay? But instead, recognizing that society has, quote unquote, done this to our patients based on our structural oppression and biases, right? We should be using terms like groups that have been historically marginalized, or they have been minoritized by the dominant culture, okay? Or groups are experiencing disadvantage, or groups with a higher risk of X outcome, okay? Or disproportionately affected by. Okay. Person first language. Culturally, this has been something that is a big shift. I mean, I grew up in the environment where you say, blah, blah, blah is the quote unquote, the diabetic patient in room, whatever. Okay. We really need to be shifting that language, right? It's a person who is living with obesity or disease A, B, C, or D. Okay. They are not the homeless. They are individuals who are currently experiencing housing instability or are currently unhoused, right? Or they're experiencing whatever that health outcome or life circumstance might be, right? It's an individual, they're not disabled, they're an individual with a mobility impairment, okay? We have been teaching them that there's a social model of disability where the medical model of disability says that the problem is with the patient that needs to be fixed. The social model of disability is that they are, they may have impairments, but it's the barriers that society puts up that is creating, quote unquote, the disability, right? If we just had universally accessible rooms, like this room is clearly not that accessible with all the stairs, then that's the barrier, right? It's not that the person has a challenge. Does that make sense? Okay. And same thing with like an individual who has a history of like incarceration or is currently incarcerated. All right. There's a lot of, I will say there's some debate about the use of the word victim versus survivor for individuals who may have experienced things like intimate partner violence, childhood trauma, etc. I think personally, my bias, a lot of people prefer the word survivor. I prefer to use a person who is experienced, and that way I don't have to worry about that language, but that's just me. Okay. The other thing is to recognize there's multiple subtypes of populations, right? We have a tendency to group everybody together. Okay, but what we're really trying to say is, if we're saying people from whatever, people from Asia, people from China, whatever, or people who identify as, okay, or people who live with this impairment. Okay. And then the violent communication, we tend to use a lot of violent communication, like target, or tackle. We're going to aim things at communities. We're going to combat, and we have a war against obesity, right? Or a war on drugs. And really what we're trying to do is move more towards like engage or collaborate with population of focus. Like we're going to we're going to collaborate with communities that happen to be, whether they're Black or whatever group we're going to be working with, or individuals living with diabetes. We want to consider the needs of quote unquote population of focus. What's our intended audience, right? And we want to eliminate disease or mitigate health inequities. And then a lot of stigma comes from the unintentional blaming that is housed in the language that we use. And I say it all the time on accident, and I'm working on it, but when we were talking with individuals who are living with obesity, we talk about oh, are you cheating on your diet? Right? It's a pejorative to that patient, right? And what we really want to say is, why don't we explore the factors that are impacting your diet or your ability to adhere to the goal that you set related to your diet, okay? Or patients who refuse vaccines. They're not refusing as this word like the authority, monolith, right? But they're choosing not to receive vaccines, okay? Non-compliant, we have a lot in our language, and we're really trying to make a shift to either things like not taking their medications as prescribed because, or not following the treatment plan because of whatever those factors might be, recognizing maybe it's an insurance issue or they don't have time or there's a transportation factor. We can use things like non-adherent is better than non-compliant. Okay, because compliant implies that they should be obeying us. Okay, and then the other one is denies. The last time I saw a patient, I'm not doing an interrogation, right? But they are not reporting A, B, C, or D. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So just a few quick tips on engaging in challenging conversations. I find engaging in conversations is much easier by just asking more questions. So it's an easy way out than saying I have to know any answers for anything. I usually don't know all the answers. I don't know any answers, right? But well, what evidence is there to support whatever it is you're stating? Or can you explain what you mean by that? Or why do you think that's the case? Okay, or how does this idea support what we already talked about related to X, Y, or Z? Okay. Other options, I use I'm curious a lot. All right. I'm curious what you mean by that. I'm curious what you thought, right? Or help me understand why. And there's something called systems thinking where you can get at the 5 whys. And that's essentially asking why in a non-judgmental manner to try to get deeper understanding of well, why do you think that? Why do you think that? Why do you think that? And the idea is that you're getting to kind of their underlying belief systems that are engaging whatever their potentially controversial statement might be. Okay. The other thing is our students are primed now probably to talk a lot about race and racism. And so I just want to give you a few tips when talking about race, because it's really hard to talk about race. What not to do, don't do anything, okay? Sidetrack the conversation. Sometimes talks about racism or conversations about race and racism turn to, well, what about gender? What about this group or what about that group? Yes, those are other oppressed groups, but here we're going to focus on the conversation around race and racism, okay? Don't end the conversation. Don't become defensive. Okay. What we do want to do is have you understand yourself, because the more you understand yourself, you can feel kind of more comfortable sitting in that conversation and leaning into it. It's okay to acknowledge and be open to admitting your own racial biases. We all have them, and we can work on mitigating the impact of those biases. Okay. Try to be open to having those conversations. Well, I'm really uncomfortable having this conversation, but let's sit with this. Okay, let's talk about this further. I had a conversation actually yesterday with my patient who was like, aren't Blacks more likely to have diabetes? And I'm like, well, it's complicated, right? So you had this long conversation about how race is a social construct and how the rates of diabetes might be higher because of all of these other social factors. Okay. And having a conversation with your student about something like that might be challenging, but we're hoping that they'll bring it up and we're hoping you'll engage in that. Okay. The idea of understanding the meaning of emotions is that people might be angry, they might be frustrated, and trying to understand what is that underlying cause of that emotion. Okay. It could be often fear that they're going to be seen as a bad person, right? Or it's a manifestation of like discomfort with the topic. Okay. And then make sure we validate and facilitate discussion of your feelings. That's really when you're talking about your feelings around a topic. I'm curious, why is it you're so angry, right? You seem angry about this. I'm curious why that is. Let's explore that further. And that's usually where a lot of the growth can actually occur. Our goal is really to talk about process and allowing that conversation and not necessarily focus on content per se. And try not to allow people to not have that conversation at all. Okay. Sometimes we have a tendency to try to shut down and not engage in those conversations because they're hard. Right. But that's where we're learning. Okay. All right. And then I would say the other important thing is really encourage and admire and really appreciate students and or other people who are willing to engage in that conversation and validate that. Right. I'm really grateful that you mentioned that to me or you shared that with me. Thank you for being so vulnerable to talk about that. Okay. So these are just a couple of resources. The AMA has it's like a 20-odd page document about language that we should or should not. It's like general guidance that they've developed from a lot of other resources about kind of using inclusive language. Okay. And then the other one is the Fostering Inclusive Clinical Learning Environments using a Psychologic Safety Lens. Okay. And with that, I'm going to stop talking and see if there's any questions or dialogue you all want to have, or if we should just go get ice cream. Yeah, sure.
We'll post, this was an announcement I was going to make at the end, but we'll post all the slide decks that have been shown over the past 2 days. So I've seen lots of people taking photos and stuff like that, but we'll make sure you've got all the resources, and we've mentioned lots of articles and links to websites and stuff like that. We'll make sure you've got all these resources available to you after the fact in exchange for your course evaluations. That's just a small thing we ask of you.
Yep.
That you're at a faculty meeting. Let's imagine you're at a faculty meeting and you're discussing the fact that we now have a more diverse resident pool coming in. And a senior faculty member says in front of, this is a big, gigantic faculty group, okay, on a Zoom call, basically, I'm paraphrasing, but very close to this, but don't worry, everyone, just because we have increased diversity, it doesn't mean the quality has dropped at all. Not a word is said by anyone. And we move on to moving right along, the weather today, right? And so, I mean, right? So yeah. So then there was a lot of side texting going on between other members of the faculty, needless to say, about this thing. But I'm just curious, like, what would people do? This is by the way, consider this like the boss guy, right? That said this. Maybe not exactly.
Safe environment to have this conversation. So what would you say?
what I'm going to say that I would say.
Wait, hang on,
I don't think it's too scared to say.
Well, that's
in the context. But I think it's appropriate to advance the message that I'm going that diversity actually leads to excellence and bringing in people from other cultural and racial backgrounds actually contributes to improvement in quality. And I would love to have some studies to cite. So if you got anything, Dr. Lee?
So there are actually lots of studies that diverse teams actually have better outcomes. They're more creative. They actually publish better, publish more, they're more productive. They decrease health disparities. In the recruitment literature, there's also evidence like diversity is an asset to your learner group. It actually improves patient satisfaction and it improves the learning environment. And there has never, they've demonstrated that there's no decrement in any of the scores, like the quote unquote classic metrics that we like to use in medicine that are invalid for this purpose, by the way. Those are not actually diminished when they look at, go to things like holistic review.
You're also kind of asking what's the right place and the right time to confront that person, maybe? And so like if you're on a big faculty call, is it appropriate to start that debate then, or to maybe do a sidebar with that person later if you felt like they would listen? I think it's a difficult question. Would I like, if this was, yeah, if you have like 50 other people or however many on the call, like, do you then, yeah, that's a hard one. I don't know. I know what I would want to do, but is that the right time in the right place?
Mark, did you have your hand up earlier? So can we pass the mic down to? Sorry.
I just said, but then you're a bystander. And we were just talking about upstander training. So, and you know, there were probably some diverse people on that call. So.
You could also just say, can you explain that? Put them on the spot.
Yeah, an easy way out is, what do you mean by that? Because then they have to explain why they said that, what is their intent by saying it. And then sometimes they're like, oh, that's coming out wrong. And that's probably because what they just said was wrong, right? Any other questions? Yeah.
I'll just.
Sorry, I can't manage a mic either.
I'll just quickly add that I did just recently attend a conflict resolution training, and one of the skills that they talked about developing was becoming more comfortable with saying like, "Ooh, like when I hear that, this is what I'm hearing," and making sure that you're using that I language, so you're not judging how other people might have reacted, and then giving them an opportunity to clarify.
There's a comment in the Zoom chat as well. Call it out. For example, why would you say that?
Great. Yeah. Another easy way is like, ouch.
Yeah, I just think it's so important for us to remember that like there's so many of these examples, right? Where we're like, gosh, kicking ourselves, like, why didn't I say anything? Did anyone else? And it's not like the opportunity is totally lost. Like, I don't know, maybe the next faculty meeting you say, I just want to bring up how something came across for me. I wonder if anyone else, you know, like we can also do it into the future, because so few of us, I think, in the moment are like ready to respond so correctly. And it's not always safe for people, you know, to put themselves out there. So just that there's opportunities going for it. Maybe it's an email, maybe it's the next meeting, maybe it's a side conversation, but even if we miss our opportunity in the moment, there's still other ways.
I would advance and propose that moving forward in these kinds of conversations and in these kinds of situations, that everybody hears our sense of the effect of. You know, maybe I should have said something at the time, but I didn't. I think that it's something that we should all be
sort of preparing ourselves mentally to be able to say something in the moment at times like that, because again, the reason these things keep getting said is because of all of the times that they've been said and nobody said anything. So it really is time to make some changes with regard to how we have these conversations in the workplace, in public, in front of our colleagues, to our bosses.
Yeah, well, and I imagine, did Shanta do the 60s?
Do the what?
Did she talk about the 60s for upstander training?
The 60s?
6Ds?
Oh, she did. There was some conversation back and forth. She did actually cover that. You can mention it.
Okay, right. So, right, display discomfort, direct interaction, delegate to somebody else, aka potentially reporting if it's an authority above you, or asking somebody with more authority to help you out. Right, distract, not my favorite personally. Delay and then debrief. Okay, so it sounds like there was maybe some debriefing going on in the chat, and that's always a possibility of just making sure like the individuals who experience that or witness that have a space to have that conversation about what they're experiencing and potentially how do we want to address this with our boss. Okay. And I think having those conversations and having like those phrases in your back pocket, right? Of ones that are your go-to thing. Because I tell you, I'm not one of those people who generally think super fast on my feet. Like aside from the, pardon my language, like the WTF that kind of goes flying through my brain. Like, did they just say that? Right? Like that is not going to be the appropriate response. I'm just going to tell you that. Right. But then of like, why would you say that? Why did you say that? I'm curious why you said that. Like if you have something that's your thing, then it's easier.
And
yeah, Austin.
I want to.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, sorry.
Slightly on the same topic, but when you were talking about like how often the students are like ahead of us or think they're ahead of us, I just want to acknowledge that I have found it helpful, like, because I think it can be awkward when you first start practicing these skills. And so like talking about like what we call it the pre-brief, like, so the last time I was on inpatient medicine, I talked to my team, like, how are we as a team going to address if this comes up? And I told them, I'm like, I've never talked to you guys about this, or sorry, you all. I'm so bad at you guys. I'm so Midwestern.
It's okay. Shanta says it all the time, and she's.
So if this comes up, like, how would we like to address this as a team? And this feels a little awkward to me. So tell me how this rolls for you. And then when I did feedback with them individually later, I said, how did that pre-brief go? I felt awkward. Was it weird? Like, and just sitting with the awkwardness and knowing that like I'm going to keep practicing and getting better. And all my learners were like, that was great. Thank you so much for doing that. So I think just knowing, even saying to your learners, like, this is a skill I'm working on. Please help me get here. I know you've had lots of training. Let's work on this together. And I found that that's really valuable, just to acknowledge, like, I'm not an expert and we're figuring it out as we go. I don't know if that's helpful.
Yeah, the pre-planning is really helpful.
I'm thinking about what you said about how we all have implicit biases and admitting our own biases. And I'm wondering if in a situation like that, instead of being punitive to the person who made the comment and kind of like shaming them or calling them out, if it might be a good idea to use it as like an educational moment where you try to do it in a kind way, where you say, that's a really great point, because actually it's true that inclusivity increases the effectivity of the team, etc. And so I guess I'm pondering, as I'm listening to different people's response, like, what's the role of publicly condemning things versus like kindly educating so that people can grow in their and leave those biases behind without feeling shamed.
Right. So the goal is not to be to shame them or to put them down. It's to, right, like, again, the vast majority of microaggressions, I'm sure she covered this, right? The intent is usually not, it's not intended that way. Okay, but that doesn't mean that there's not an impact. And that's the important thing that we need to address. But when we think about it, that's why we're using kind of more neutral conversations. Like, so there's there's a different one from the Teaching Tolerance Speaking Up program by the Southern Poverty Law Center that is interrupt. So, hey, I'm really not comfortable with what you just said, but it's not like you're a jerk, right? It's more of like, I'm not comfortable with what you said, or it's not sitting well with me. Then the next one is question, like, I'm curious why you said that, or help me understand why you said that. I know those aren't really questions, but that's how I word my questions, sorry. And then there's echo of like, if you hear somebody else speak up, then you can say, oh yeah, I agree. To offer kind of more support. Like, I agree, I'm really curious why you would say something like that.
Austin, and then a question from the chat.
I was going to echo what you were just saying, Rita. So in family therapy, which I think is like maybe one of the best tools we would have for these type of conversations, there's really only 4 types of relationship damage in communication: criticism, contempt, stonewalling, defensiveness. Criticism is by far the most common, and the most common way that we actually communicate criticism is through questions, particularly why. And so if you actually replace your why questions with I'm noticing, or I'm curious about X, you're actually going to decrease the likelihood of a defensive reaction. But every time you say, why are you doing that? It's like when you have like a student go, oh my God, why did you even say that? Why did you even come here? What are you doing? Right? And those are actually people will act, I do that in the voice because that's actually how people will hear an experience, even if that's not the tone that you put it in. Every time you use a why question, whether it's a patient or a peer or a senior leader, I actually would just recommend avoiding why and replacing with I'm curious about, or help me understand. Gentle commands are always more effective at getting more information than questions.
I love that. All right, so this is more of just a comment from the chat, but I'll just share this because I think it's insightful. Sometimes it's hard to know if something was uncomfortable or offensive for somebody else, and that's why people don't say anything. At those times, it might still be worthwhile to check in with the potential victim and acknowledge our ignorance, our personal journey and learning, and just check in.
Right. So did you all hear that? Okay. Yeah, so that's where, if you're not, so number one, if you found it offensive, then I think it's okay, even if it was directed at somebody else. If you are worried about that other individual who you think may have experienced the microaggression, but you're not sure and you don't want to overstep your bounds, I think that's where a debrief with that individual may be reasonable. And that is something like, I saw so-and-so make this comment to you. That made me uncomfortable. I'm curious how you felt about that. Okay, that gives them opportunity, right? Like sometimes some people who experience microaggressions on a regular basis, sometimes you just like want to let it go. Like you don't, if it happens to you 20, 50, hundreds times a day, you just don't have the energy to deal with it. I'm just not going to make a big deal out of it. Fine, right? And so that gives them kind of that power and control back, and you're putting it in their court as opposed to, oh my gosh, you need to say something. And I'm like, they don't have to do anything, right? And again, if you're always trying to quote unquote leap in to somebody else's defense, we always have to worry a little bit about, like, we have a tendency to have this like savior complex of like, we're going to swoop in and save somebody helpless and defenseless. And the reality is they're not. They're perfectly capable. And that's why, if you do end up doing that because it was something that was really offensive to you, I think it's okay, but you want to debrief with that person. Because if we do it too much, then we start taking their voice and their power away from them. Any other thoughts, questions? All right. And it's 5 minutes early. Is that okay? Sorry. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rita. That was fantastic. All right. Should we call it a day, everyone? You ready to go teach some LIC students?